So we're going to be talking about assignment number 5 and how to outline it to kind of get you going through the assignment. So what I've done is I've actually started with the example program that I've given you. Now this example program isn't exactly how the math game works, but it's close enough to give us an outline. So I'm going to start with this as if I was using this as a springboard to do the actual assignment. So in this, we've got this main menu here. We can click play game. This is where the game would be played. And then we could be taken to the high score screen or the end screen and then back to the main menu. Now on this particular game, there are on assignment, you actually have some extra credit for the high scores that we could bring up another window if you wanted to do it that way. You don't have to, it's for extra credit. And also the enter user data, you can enter that right here on the main menu. Again, I was just showing you different ways of passing information around. So really, we're going to have a main menu, we're going to have the game window, and then that final score for our game. Those are the only windows we're going to need. Now the requirements spell out that we have to have two classes. One is user and one is game. So let's just kind of go through each window so we kind of have an idea of what we're going to need to create. So for the math main menu, we're going to have the user be able to enter their information for us. So things like the name and the age would have to go on the main menu. We'd also need them to select the game type. So we'd need to create some radio buttons here, for instance, that maybe tells them, addition, subtraction, division, multiplication, things like that, along with that user's information. So they'd have to enter that here before we can play the game. Now once we play the game, so on the game, what we can do here is we're going to have a start button where the user can click that. It'll start. We'll generate some questions, and we'll also have a timer here that's showing us the number of elapsed seconds. Once the final question is answered, it'll automatically take us to the high score screen where we're going to display the user's name, their age, the number correct, and how many seconds it took them to complete the game. So that's the math game. So let's just go ahead and start here with our user class, and let's think through the kinds of information we're going to need for our user class. So I'm also going to think through of how I'm going to pass this data around, how I'm going to save it. Now, in a real-world application, we'd probably be saving to a database. We would have lots of different users, things like that. But for our application, the requirement is to have one user. So let's keep it simple for this assignment. And what I would recommend to do is just create a static for the name part of our user class. And so when the user enters in that name, we can fill it up here. But because it's static, we can just set that anywhere. Because again, we don't need to keep instantiating user objects because there's only one user. Now in the real world, you probably have a list of users that you would fill up. Now the next that we have to do is enter their age. So we create another just little private attribute with a public property for the age. Now the next thing is we start thinking through this user, and as they play the game, okay, well there's some stats we have to keep track of. So why not add that to our user class? Something like maybe like I number correct. Because remember, we have to keep track as the game's being played how many they get correct so we can display that on the end score. Now, again, let's create this as static so that while we're on the last form, we can just access this variable directly and we don't have to worry about passing any data around. And then the last one that I would recommend is like game seconds. And so again, you don't have to do it this way. The game seconds could go in the game class. There's various things, but for me, this is sort of like the user score. So that's why I'm going to put it here in the user's class. So now let's go over to our game class. So the game class is our business logic. Here we're going to have to create all the logic that user can play our game with. So one of the requirements is that the user has to be able to select a game type. So addition, subtraction, multiply, or divide. So we have to have a way of actually saving that information away. So one of the ways I would do that is with an enumeration. So first I would create a public enumeration that defines the game types. Then I would create a private static variable of that game type, and then I would create a public property for it. And so on the main menu, the user would be able to then set this game type, and then throughout the application we know what game type was set. So the next in our game class, one of the requirements is that we have to be able to generate questions. So one of the ideas that I had going into this was, okay, I know that I'm going to have to, let's say we're doing addition. So I have to have something like 2 plus 3 equals 5. So that means I have to have my left operand, my right operand, and my answer. So one way we could do this would be to create another class, something like math game question. And all it's going to do is hold the left number, the right number, and the answer. So there won't be any logic in this class. It's just going to create, these will just be some integer variables that'll help us to hold each math question. And then what we can do is in our math game, we have to have a method to generate questions. And so let's create a method called generate question that actually returns a math game question. So we can use the game type. So we can just do if, and then based on the game type, if it's add, we can generate two random numbers, assign that to the left and right, so we can instantiate a new game question here. And then we can set the left and right number based on the random data we just created. If it was subtraction, we need to be a little bit careful because we have to make sure it's positive numbers. And for division, we have to make sure the whole number answers. And then, again, there's different ways that'll let you figure out how to generate that division for a whole number. So next, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create another method. So now that we've generated the question, so we can through the game as the user's playing it, we've displayed the data to them, and now they've entered a guess. So now we have to validate that guess. So I would create another method called validate user guess. We pass it in and return a true or false based on the user's guess. Well, we know what we can do is we can save away this math game question. We could save that as a class attribute, and that way, so maybe I should put this up here just to make it a little more clear. So every time we generate a new math question, we wouldn't actually do it here. I'm just doing this for the method, but we'd set this game question, and then when we validate it, we have this already saved away, so we know what the first and the last numbers are, so we know what the answer is. We can compare that to the user's guess and return a true or false based on that. The other thing I would recommend that you do is completely code this class first. And I would do this for almost all your assignments, that I would try to outline your business logic classes just like I did here, and then I would fill it in. Then I would actually write a program to test. So I would call these methods and implement them and unit test them so that you know that they work. Then you can just call them behind your user interface. So now let's go to our main menu. Now that we've kind of completed these classes, let's go to our math main menu. Now remember, on this main menu, we're going to have the user's information, their name and their age, and then the game type. So that's what they're going to enter on this screen here. So from there, we're going to have to, really there's only, and so these methods here, are just the methods that I've already created for you about the navigation on how to get to the different windows. So now the user is going to have to begin the game. So they've entered the information, and they're going to call this button click called begin game. And so what's the first thing we have to do? Well, they've entered their name and their age, so we always want to validate the user's input. So we validate the user's name and age, and then we display any error labels if that's incorrect. The next thing we have to do is they have to enter in the game type, so we have to validate that the game type is selected. Now you'll have these radio buttons. I would recommend that just default to have the addition always selected, but that's kind of up to you. So now that we've validated both of those, so again, let's pretend that the information is correct. Well, now we need to set that information on the static variables for our user class. So over here, they entered the name and age, so now we're going to set them. So in order to set a static variable, it would be something like this, where you would just say, CLS user dot name or dot age, etc. Something like that. And you can just access it because it's static. So the next thing, we're going to do something very similar, but instead we're going to set the game type now in our game class. So now that's where we're going to be setting here. So now our game class has set whatever game type the user has done. And then if all that data is valid, then we're going to display the game window. So the user's entered their name, their age, the game type. We can now go to the game window. So now in the game window, you would complete the UI here. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to display a game question to the user. We're going to have the user start the game. We're also going to have to display the number of seconds that have passed, so it would just continually increment 1, 2, 3, etc., as the game is being played. So let's think through that. So first, let's think through some attributes. So we know we're going to have to keep track of which question we're on because we have to enter 10 questions and answers. So something like the current game question. So we just need an integer to tell us we're on question 1 through 10. Next, we have a requirement to display the number of elapsed seconds to the user. So we can create a variable like iSeconds. Now, in order to display the seconds after the user clicks submit, so remember every second we want to increment number of seconds. So what we can do is we can create a dispatch timer, and that timer, when it goes off, will increment the seconds. So let's think through that. Let's actually start with the start button click. So the user has clicked the start button. They're ready to go. They're ready to begin the game. So now they've started the game. What's the first thing that we need to do? Well, we need to start our timer. And so that was that timer we just talked about. And we'll have a timer tick. And so you've done this before. And so we just create a method that's the timer tick method and just increment iSeconds by 1 and then display it to the user. And that would, every second it goes off and just shows the user how many seconds have gone. Now since they've clicked start, we've started the timer, but we also have now created a method in the game class called generate question. And so that does all the hard work for us. So all we have to do now is call generate question and display that to the user, and we're done with the start button click. So now, once the question is displayed to the user, they need to enter it into a text box. And don't forget there's a requirement that the user has to be able to press enter to be able to submit it or click the button. And so now we've got this, submit guess button click that we have to think through. And so when they click that, what's the first thing we need to do? Well, we need to validate the user's guess. And we've already done that right here. So all the hard work, again, had been done for us. And so, well, not done for us, we did it, and then we just implement it. But we know it works now. So now we can validate the user's guess. If it's correct, we need to tell the user if they got the guess right or wrong. And then we need to update the static iNumberCorrect in the CLS user class because we're keeping track of how many they've got correct. Now what we need to do is figure out, okay, we need to display 10 questions to the user. So if we're not on the last question, then we just repeat this same idea that we did here, and we generate and we just display the question to the user. And then we're actually done waiting for them to click this button again. Now if they've clicked it and we are on the last question, then what we're going to do is we need to then display the high score screen. However, before we do that, we need to tell the high score screen to display the user's score. So now I just made up this method right here. And so what we're going to have to do is let's go over to the high score window here, where you'd have to display the user's name, their age, their score, and how many they got correct. And so over here, let's just create a method now that we just display the user's information to. So just create a public method called display user score. Now, inside the user's class over here, these are all static. So all you have to do is access each of these static variables and display them on this window here. And so you call this method first, then you display the high score window. And that way it's in the correct state for the user. And now the high scores displayed, they can close that, they would go back to the main menu, and they would repeat the process. So hopefully that gives you enough outline of the math game to kind of help you with the requirements. Let me know if you have any questions.